This week, we see a major ending to a 1.5-year story, and we see the beginning of another story that we get to go through for the next 6 to 8 months. And that's because this week we have the eclipse finale. We have the last solar eclipse in Libra. This has been going on since about summer of 2023, and this is the last eclipse that we have in Libra. And Mars enters shadow this week, which is going to give us all of the details and let us know exactly what we're going to be coming back to at about February of 2025. Welcome back to the Astrology Report. My name is Cam White. If you don't know me already, I'm a professional astrologer. I've been doing this for almost 8 years. I have hundreds of videos, and I love talking about the current transiting astrology. So if you want to keep up to date with everything that's going on in the sky, make sure you subscribe below. Like this video, it actually does help me out, and comment. Let me know what you're looking forward to, what you're going through, and again, what you're not looking forward to. We have a huge week this week, so let's just go ahead and jump straight into it. So we're starting Monday off with the moon still in Virgo, making a sextile to Mars in Cancer and making an opposition to Saturn almost at the same time, since Mars trining Saturn really did happen like on Sunday night. We also have the Mercury Cazimi as the highlight for Monday. And then after that happens, the moon is just going to be applying to a square with Jupiter. So there's a little bit going on here. The first thing to talk about is the moon in Virgo, making that sextile to Mars and immediately making that opposition to Saturn. So the way I look at this is that the moon's in Virgo, better about organizing, getting things ready to go, especially because we're about to go into the solar eclipse. So the moon is almost dark at this point. And the moon in Virgo, being a dark moon, is kind of like frantically getting organized and getting ready for everything that you got to do. It's like before you have a big conversation that you need to have, it's like writing down all your notes, your talking points and things like that. But with the moon making that sextile to Mars and then going opposite Saturn, it's like organizing your priorities and kind of overthinking the situation. I like the moon in Virgo making a sextile to Mars in Cancer. This is kind of like, hey, what are my priorities? What do I actually have to address? But the moon in Virgo going opposite Saturn is kind of like, well, I can say all of these things, but what are going to be the rebuttals? I can plan all of this stuff, but what are the things that I don't know? And there's just kind of a certain point where you have to stop. And again, the moon in Virgo, you know, we all have those moments in the shower where it's like we overthink a conversation that's never going to happen. The moon in Virgo opposite Saturn kind of gives that vibe. It's like, let's not overthink things that we don't know what's going to happen or not. But the moon in Virgo making a sextile to Mars in Cancer is like just addressing your priorities, addressing your emotions. What I do like about the moon in Virgo, though, is getting things together before this eclipse, getting organized, getting detailed, and it's just sextiling Mars in Cancer. It's like, hey, just take care of what you need to take care of. Don't worry about the rest. The moon in Virgo going opposite Saturn is going to feel like we have to take on more than we really need to at this point, and it's going to be easy to be overwhelmed, and just try not to lean into that too much. But we have the Mercury Cazimi. So this Cazimi's really stood out to me over this whole year, because this Mercury Cazimi is happening almost essentially on the South Node. And we get this Mercury Cazimi on the South Node right before we get a solar eclipse. So this just seems peculiar, I think is probably the easiest way to put it. A Mercury Cazimi is when Mercury conjoins the sun. And because Mercury is not retrograde, this is on the other side of the sun. So right now, Mercury is on the other side of the sun, and the Earth and the sun and Mercury are all lining up. A Mercury Cazimi is typically a sense of clarity, a communication being had, you receiving a message, you sending a message, a light bulb moment. Mercury is, again, communication, ideas, thoughts. And when it goes Cazimi, when it goes in the heart of the sun, there is a rebirth here. There is a clarity to the situation. And so with this being in Libra, this has probably a little bit more to do with relationships or other people, and that there is some sort of a clarity here, but it's on the South Node. So there's this kind of like having to move on or address something from the past or let go of something. There's something kind of just draining and exhausting about it. Like, you know, maybe you've had some problems with someone, you need to bring it up and you need to have that conversation. Or again, it really depends on what house Libra rules in your chart. That's going to give you, and also what house's Mercury rules in your chart, because that's going to give you a much better idea. Like, let's say you're a Virgo rising, this Mercury Cazimi is happening in your second house of money. So it might be like an expense that you know that you've had to have, that you know that you need to make, and you don't really want to, but it's time to just kind of pay that bill. Or again, maybe, you know, there's something wrong with your car and you need to just kind of like pay it, even though it sucks, but you have to do it. That's kind of the idea here. So with this is also messages being sent or received, typical Mercury stuff, Mercury Cazimi, it's like all when it kind of happens. But this just being on the South Node adds that little bit of a faded touch to it. Fated, not faded as in like the color or the color contrast. Anyway, I find this really interesting because this is going to give us an insight as to what is going on the solar eclipse that we have later this week. I would really kind of just like pay attention to Monday and what is happening, because this is all going to become really important when we get to Wednesday. Now, for the rest of the day on Monday, the moon will just be applying to a square with Jupiter. And there's just too much noise and too much information, right? The moon's in Virgo. The moon in Virgo is always really like sensitive when it comes to the body. Like your hormones are off, or you're a little bit too neurologically, I don't know, upset. I can't think of the right phrasing for that. But the moon squaring Jupiter is just kind of overwhelmed with all the information, all of the details, and what to do. And so I would just kind of, again, do your best to calm yourself down. We are about to go into an eclipse. The moon is in frantic Virgo. The moon is squaring Jupiter. You're just going to probably feel a little overwhelmed. So just do the small things that are going to make you feel a little bit more grounded is probably the best way to look at Monday. And so then we get to Tuesday. And on Tuesday, the moon at the end of Virgo is going to make a trine to Uranus, going to go opposite Neptune, and trine Pluto. So like I said last week, I really keep thinking about the moon making these hits to the outer planets all at the last degrees before it ingresses into the new sign. This is a lot of emotional bouncing around, but it's all bigger stuff. It's like there's going to be the sense of knowing something bigger is coming. And I feel like we're going to have that for a while until we get to 2025 and we see all of the shifts that we have going on. So the way I would look at Tuesday is there's going to be kind of like, the moon making the trine Uranus. Cool. Like, some sort of a clever trick or some sort of a, solution gets made, but then it goes opposite Neptune. So then there's kind of this confusion around the situation, but then it trines Pluto. So there's this kind of like, okay, well, I can figure it out anyway. It's just a lot of emotional bouncing around. And I don't think it really helps to like clarify each little point, because then right after that happens, the moon ingresses into Libra. And so when the moon ingresses into Libra, now we're in that dark moon phase right before the eclipse. It's kind of low key. A dark moon phase is kind of like, okay, it's like, it almost reminds me of when you're in a movie theater and you're done watching the ads. And then it's like that 10 seconds of it just being black before the movie actually begins. God, that's a good analogy. That's the feeling. It's just like right before the main event kicks off, but it's kind of just low key, chill energy. Tuesday is a little finicky. Like, again, maybe you're running to go get popcorn and snacks right before the movie begins. That's kind of the vibe. So on Tuesday, it's going to feel like a bigger deal than it is, but then we get to Wednesday and that's where the bigger deal happens. So we get to Wednesday, and the first highlight that we have is the solar eclipse in Libra. Then after the moon has that eclipse, or I should say after the sun becomes eclipsed by the moon will then conjoin Mercury and square Mars. So typically when we have an eclipse and then the moon makes immediate aspects to something, they're not that important, because you have to think like the moon is eclipsing the sun. The sun has, cast rays. The moon is technically, it's combust or it's underneath the rays at a certain point. It takes a little bit while for the new moon to technically begin. And the new moon is technically when the moon is visible in the night sky, and it won't be visible at this point. So it's still technically dark. But with the solar eclipse, you have to think what has been going on since last summer of 2023, when the South Node entered Libra and the North Node entered Aries. The South Node is draining, exhausting. It's making you kind of purge things out, look at things through a different way. And what has happened since then, and this is kind of our last moment of addressing it. This is a huge release. This is going to be bringing up the past, but this is kind of just closing out a chapter. The South Node doesn't actually leave Libra until like January, I think like 3rd of 2025. So right when we start 2025, the node shift, we're kind of onto a whole new thing. But this is the last eclipse that we have here. And I really kind of look at this as the emotional intention, the emotional energy around ending this is happening now, versus when the South Node, lingers around for the next, 2 months. It'll still be kind of there, but then once we get to January, now we're really on to a new kind of chapter. So the solar eclipse is really kind of just the season is over, eclipse season is over, now things aren't going to be nearly as intense, but this really just seems like one last purge, one last getting rid of something. It is going to bring up stuff from the past. This is kind of a low energy. You have to think this is on the South Node. The South Node is an eclipse on the lower part of the ecliptic. Then, though, the moon is going to conjoin Mercury and square Mars. And I feel like this is just kind of like not knowing how to navigate or negotiate this, because the moon conjoining Mercury in Libra is like wanting to have diplomacy and, be like, oh, well, this is all fair and balanced. But then as the moon conjoins Mercury, there's like that feeling of wanting to do that. But then the moon squares Mars, where, again, a little bit more frantic energy. I really look at like things in Libra and Mars and Cancer is like, have you ever been in a, let's say a work situation where everyone is being fair and balanced and trying to work with the team, but then you have someone that's like, no, I don't want to do that. No, like they're just being really difficult to deal with. And you could tell it's not like them, they're just going through something. You know what I mean? Like typically when people are mad at you, it's never like you, it's typically they're mad about something else and they're just projecting it onto you. The moon squaring Mars is just kind of like really highlighting that, like, while you want to be fair and balanced and peaceful, Mars in Cancer is going to bring kind of a defensive attitude to it that's going to be hard to deal with. And I don't know how I feel about the moon, having that eclipse and then the moon squaring Mars almost immediately after, because that just seems like again, the moon's dark at this point. So like, how obvious is it? And again, this eclipse is going to happen, and you'll probably see the lingering of the eclipse for a little while. Like, I know last year when we had the solar eclipse in Libra, I didn't see the events of what the eclipse was until 3 days later, when the moon was actually became visible and the moon entered Scorpio. So give this a little bit of time, but I do wonder about Wednesday just being really low energy, knowing that something is coming, knowing that you got to end this, knowing that you got to move on, and this being kind of like the last of it. And again, after this, I can't sit here and say that the energy gets like better or happier or more intense. I just think this is a low point. And again, this is the ending of this chapter. But when we have Mars entering shadow this weekend, that's the beginning of something else. Then we get to Thursday, and all we have on Thursday is the moon still in Libra, making a trine to Jupiter and squaring Pluto. So there is some sort of relief happening here. Again, like Jupiter is about hope and optimism, and it's in Gemini, and the moon in Libra is like, again, working with other people. The moon is starting to gain a little bit of visibility at this point, and the moon just trining Jupiter is like, okay, like think of the bright side. You did the hard work. What happened, and now you can kind of start looking forward to the future. The only issue is after the moon trines Pluto, it starts squaring, after the moon trines Jupiter, it starts squaring Pluto. And there is this having to confront fear. You know, Pluto and Capricorn. Pluto is about power and fear and corruption and, again, your relationship to that. And I look at the moon in Libra squaring Pluto as like, can you address that with balance? Can you address that with ease? Can you address that with charm and with class? Or are you going to, again, like break down in the face of fear? You know, being not afraid doesn't mean like, you know, just going, and screaming at everything, but just kind of like emotionally balancing yourself out and being like, hey, you know, this is something scary that I have to do, or I have to face, or I might feel scared of the future or what's going on. But as long as I handle it with tact, as long as I handle it with class, I know I can get through it. And I look at the moon shining Jupiter as like, there's going to be this hope and this faith and seeing the bigger picture. But then the moon squares Pluto, and it's like, okay, well, can you make that ride out? Can you make that hope and, you know, faith kind of last a little while? Because the moon squaring Pluto is going to bring up some fears. And the biggest thing is, again, like, you know, I forgot where I said this, but like fear is the devil. Like, we can't play into this fear. And I know I've talked a lot about all of the crazy shit that's happening in the next few years, but you can't let that fear overcome you. It's important to be aware of what's going on. It's important to be aware of what's going on so you don't be afraid of things that you don't really know. And then we get to Friday and the vibe shifts. On Friday, the moon is going to ingress into Scorpio. And then we have another highlight, which is Venus making a trine to Saturn. There's a lot that I like here. And like I said last week, we're going, all of this water sign stuff that we're going through, all emotions, all internal. And it's like fallen Mars, detriment Venus. And then you have Saturn, which is, I mean, technically a malefic. However, it does have some benefits also in the mix. The moon going into Scorpio is going to be, you know, moody and emo and like, oh, why is this happening? And, you know, spiraling a little bit and being really sunk in our emotions. I look at Friday night as the moon going into Scorpio, and Venus in Scorpio trining Saturn is like, that's a good goth night. Like, I don't know how many people like to go to like goth, you know, parties, but this is like the goth emo energy is very livid on Friday. So there's going to be the sunken, moody feeling. But with Venus in detriment in Scorpio, she's making that trine to Saturn. And a lot of this is like doing things that aren't fun for character development. You are going to go through this not easy feeling. It's, again, Venus is about fun and pleasure, and she's in a sign where she can't do the more orthodox things of fun and pleasure. So again, that looks like an extreme one way or an extreme another way. But Venus trining Saturn is kind of like, it reminds me of having to go without. And for example, when you get rid of something in your life, let's say it's a bad vice or a bad habit, there is this physical effect. Like, let's say you're quitting, you know, alcohol or drugs. There's a physical effect to it that like is very difficult to deal with. But then there's the emotional insecurity part of it, where you feel like, you know, you're using a vice to fulfill something deep inside you or to protect something deep inside you. And I look at Venus and Scorpio trining Saturn and Pisces as like, this isn't necessarily about the physical aspect, but like the internal and the spiritual. Like, why do you need that vice? Why do you reach out for that? And Venus trining Saturn is like, the more you go without it, the more stoic you become, the more, you know, responsible, the more in control of yourself you become. And that's why I kind of wrote down, like, it's a lot of Venus trining Saturn is doing things that aren't necessarily fun, but for character development, to be a better version of yourself. And it's all internal. Like, it's not like, oh, I'm just going to stop doing this and, you know, I'll be able to move on. It's like, you know, I think I talked about this last week, when it comes to like magical thinking, like you can apply a ceremonial event to anything that you do. And it's about the intention behind why you do something. Like, it could be something as simple as just like minding your P's and Q's, having better manners, being more aware of yourself. And it's not about the actual thing itself. It's about your intention behind it. And I look at that Venus and Scorpio trining Saturn and Pisces is like, really look at like, again, you going without desire, you going without pleasure, you being able to like fast from that stuff and making it internal. Like this is supposed to be making you more rigid. This is going to be making you more structured. This is going to be making you more invincible, more powerful, more disciplined. And I think with Friday, as the moon goes into Scorpio, we might be in that sunken feeling of that lost feeling. We are going to be uncomfortable, but those uncomfortable feelings are really important to be aware of, because if we are, again, astrology is a time honoring exercise, and the time right here is uncomfortability. And if you are looking to put yourself in a place where you are comfortable, you are going to struggle with it, and it's going to turn into looking to things that aren't very fun or aren't very comfortable. My bad. Let me rephrase that. We are going to be in an uncomfortable situation, and if you are looking for comfort, you are going to find ways to do it that aren't going to be good for you. This is a time to sit in the uncomfort. This is the time to really think about, again, it's kind of like being a kid in timeout. Like, think about what you did. It sucks being in timeout and being punished when you're a kid, because that's, it seems like the biggest thing in the world, but like, reflect on it. You don't want to feel that feeling anymore, and make sure you feel that feeling so you know that you don't want to feel it anymore, and so you could change your behaviors. That's what's really good about Friday. And then we get to Saturday. So we have that eclipse, things end, and then things begin on Saturday. Mars enters shadow on Saturday. The moon, while it's in Scorpio, is going to make a trine to Saturn. It's going to then make a conjunction to Venus, and then it's going to trine Mars. And we have another highlight on Saturday, which is Mercury is going to square Mars. A lot going on here. I would really pay attention to Saturday, because there's going to be themes and events that happen on Saturday that are going to be very important as we move forward. So the thing is, with Mars ingressing into shadow, Mars is going to hit 17 degrees Cancer, and Mars will go through the rest of Cancer, go into Leo, station retrograde, move backwards into Cancer, and it'll come right back to this degree. Make sure you subscribe, because I'm making a Mars retrograde video, how it's going to affect you and all that stuff. And if you want access to that video, or if you want to make sure you see the video, make sure you subscribe, because that's going to be coming out sometime soon. But you're going to be coming back to this moment. The reason I want you to pay attention to Saturday is there's going to be something that's happening on Saturday that you're going to come back to here at the end of February. What are those things that might happen? Well, it depends on your chart, depends on your time lords and everything like that. But I think what's more important is understanding that like Saturday is important for the future, and that whatever is going on, wherever you're at on Saturday, you're going to come back to at the end of February and really into March of 2025. You will get a slight nudge of what is going to happen, meaning like Mars in Cancer entering shadow. Maybe again you get like a ticket in the mail, or your car gets repossessed. I'm not saying that's exactly what this symbolizes, but it's more of like, oh, I now know what this Mars retrograde is going to be about. I have a little bit more insight as to what this Mars retrograde is going to be about for me, and that's what you need to pay attention to. Now, as the moon is in Scorpio, trining Saturn, conjoining Venus, trining Mars, like I said before, it's the same vibe on Friday. We're going to be a little emotionally distraught. We're going to be kind of sunken in our bad feelings, but it trines Saturn and it conjoins Venus and it trines Mars. It's like when you do something that is really hard for yourself, like there's so many things in life that, like, for example, something that might seem very insignificant to others might be like, was incredibly difficult for you to go through. And, that significance of that event has a lasting impact. And that's how I look at Saturday with this moon stuff, is like, this may not seem that big of a deal to maybe other people, but maybe emotionally it is a big deal for you, and you're having to go through something very deep. And this seems, again, why I've been talking about this Mars, retrograde is like, yeah, it sucks. We have to do something we don't want to do, but it's very supported, is like for moments like this. The moon is in Scorpio. It's not feeling good, but it's conjoining Venus. It's trining Saturn. It's trining Mars. Like, you're not going to be feeling good, but this is like a really, really important time. And rather than trying to escape that bad feeling, honor this feeling and lean into it a little bit more. Make the change that you have to do. This is why, if you've signed up for my newsletter almost like a month or two ago, I made a newsletter about Mars being in Cancer, and it being like the Hoarders TV show. These people, they have all these strangers come into their house, and they want to purge, they want to get rid of their stuff. They live this disgusting lifestyle. But then once this things start going away, they have this panic attack, and everything that they known and everything that they've protected themselves with is going away, and now they're vulnerable, right? Like that, the garbage was like protecting them from their trauma in some sort of way. It was a trauma response. And then, they get worked up. Like, that's kind of like what Saturday really looks like, is like, you're going to have to purge some stuff, and it is going to be really uncomfortable, but like, this is the Band-Aid ripping off moment. And we're going to come back to this. We have a whole healing journey that we've got to go through, and none of this is fun. But if we sit with it and we honor it and we respect it, we're going to see a lot more rewards as time goes on. Now, the only other highlight is Mercury on Saturday is going to make a square to Mars. I don't care for this. This is a lashing out. Like, for example, in the TV show Hoarders, they want their junk to be removed, but again, someone says like, "Hey, what about this?" And they have a moment where their emotions get the best of them, and they hurt other people's feelings. And I think as human beings, we're really harsh on everybody in terms of like I always felt like society has such a negative view of negative emotions. Like when someone is upset or pissed, like you got to let them. Like they might hurt your feelings a little bit, and that's okay. Like you can't take it personally because it's not you, it's that person, and they just need to like express that. And no, it's not okay to like just like verbally assault people all the time. But I look at Mercury squaring Mars as like, you got to be kind to yourself here. Like if you kind of freak out, or if if someone says something really aggressive to you, or you say something really aggressive to someone else, like acknowledge that you might have been in the wrong and that you kind of lashed out. Or for example, acknowledge that, if someone is, yelling at you or says something harsh to you, that it's not really about you and it's about them. Just kind of acknowledge that and respect that, and don't take it too personally. But Mercury squaring Mars, there seems like Saturday's really sensitive. Is probably the easiest way I could look at it. So really be easy on yourself and understand there's a lot deeper things going on here, and it's not really about you, or if you are the person that is a little bit emotionally distraught. It really is you, and it's not really these other people, and you've got to navigate these emotions a little bit better. But Saturday is really emotional. It's going to be hard to be, nice to people. It's going to be, easy to lash out. I would tend to not lash out on people. I don't really, say, like, I don't think that's what you should do, but I think you should just be aware of Saturday is going to be a little emotional, and, people's feelings might be hurt, including yours or someone else, and just acknowledge that. And, again, I make these weekly horoscopes so you guys have a better idea of how to navigate this. And the way I look at Saturday is if that's the energy, just know someone might blow up or you might blow up, and you got to be easy on yourself and you got to be easy on other people, because there's no need to retaliate against this. But then we get to Sunday, and Sunday looks a lot better. Because on Sunday, the moon is going to go opposite Uranus, then it's going to trine Neptune, sextile Pluto. So like I said, when the moon is in the last degrees of the water and the earth signs, it's making all these connections to all the outer planets right before it ingresses into a new sign. And then the moon will ingress into Sagittarius. The big thing here is, again, emotional pinball. The moon going opposite Uranus is, again, another disruption, another not feeling good, but then the moon trines Neptune, and the moon in Scorpio trining Neptune and Pisces. So like, it just reminds me of being a kid, and, you get in trouble, or you had a bad day at school, and you kind of like, in your head play out the scenarios like, yeah, fuck them, and, they're shitty, and, maybe I deserve to die, or whatever it is. And then the moon, sextiles Pluto, where it's just kind of like, way more emotionally intense than it needs to be. And so there's a lot of emotional pinball. There's a lot of emotional disruption. But then the moon enters Sagittarius. Like, it's like being a kid, and the moon's in Scorpio. You're hangry, you're grumpy, you're upset, you're emo, you got hormones, raging through your body. Maybe you just need to cry in your bedroom, pretend that you're going to kill yourself, get some attention. And then after you cry and you take a quick cry nap, the moon goes into Sagittarius and you feel better. Like the moon going into Sagittarius is going to be like a sweet sense of release, a sweet sense of like, okay, like I don't feel that way anymore. And I could start seeing the bigger picture, or at least seeing what other opportunities or seeing what other options are available to me. And that's how we go into next week. So this week is, again, really kind of a lot, to be honest with you guys, even though it really isn't at the same time. But what's important about this week is like we end this week with the eclipse, or we start this week with the ending of these eclipses, and we start the Mars retrograde cycle. We start Mars in shadow, where all of this stuff are going to come back up again. Next week, though, Venus makes a trine to Mars. I have a really funny meme for that one. Mercury trines Jupiter. I actually really like Mercury trine Jupiter. Jupiter goes retrograde. I have a lot of thoughts about Jupiter retrograde. Mercury is going to make a square to Pluto. Ouch. Mercury then goes into Scorpio, and the sun is going to make its trine to Jupiter, and the sun will square Mars by the end of next week. So again, as we go along through these next couple of weeks, guys, things are like slowly going from like, the frustration of August. September was, kind of remotely chilled, to like deep water sign intensity. Like, and it kind of just happens really slowly. Like you're not even going to really realize it. But by the time we get to next week, we're going to be like, oh, we are in the shits right now. So make sure you subscribe to see next week's video. Like this video. Let me know what's going on for you guys. And I'll be seeing you guys next week.